Chapter 1. Streetlights and Other Liars, the City at Night was a confession that never quite got finished. Neon bled into puddles like spilled ink, and the pavement held reflections the way lonely people hold old letters too long, too carefully, too unwilling to admit the message had already been read. Streetlights stood in tired rows, casting cones of yellow that didn't quite manage to keep the dark out. The rain fell with the patience of someone who'd seen everything and stopped being surprised. I walked through it with my collar up, like the cold had anything to do with why I felt exposed. I was 20 and my name was still Thomas. It wasn't a lie, it was just incomplete. A name that worked well enough on paper, like cheap glue. It held things together for strangers' forms, IDs, polite introductions, but it didn't hold me. Saying it out loud felt like putting on a jacket you'd outgrown. It still zipped, technically. It just cut into your ribs while you pretended you couldn't feel it. I worked at the Municipal Archive. It was the city's attic everything that had once mattered, but now lived in boxes and silence. Birth certificates from the 19th century, divorce filings from the 80s, old police reports that smelled faintly of cigarettes and unfinished business. People thought archives were quiet. They were wrong. They hummed with the weight of forgotten lives. The building was old, not romantic old tired old. Fluorescent lights buzzed like annoyed insects. The air was always a degree too cold, as if the city wanted its past preserved in a kind of refrigerated regret. The work suited me. It didn't ask questions. I moved through the shelves with a cart and a barcode scanner, pulling boxes for researchers, returning files, filing new requests. The papers never stared. The papers never hesitated. The papers never tried to decide what I was. At lunch, I escaped to a coffee shop 2 blocks away. It had fogged windows, scratched wooden tables, and a smell like burnt milk and stubborn hope. The kind of place where tired people leaned into warmth and pretended it made them less tired. That's where Clara worked. She wasn't the kind of beautiful that stopped rooms. She was the kind that made rooms soften. Dark hair, calm eyes, a mouth that didn't waste words. When she listened, she didn't just wait. She made space. It felt like being offered a chair in a world where I'd been standing for years. She handed me my coffee one afternoon and didn't immediately look away. "You look like you're always somewhere else," she said. I took the cup. The heat bled through the cardboard sleeve into my fingers. "Maybe I am," I said. She leaned her elbows on the counter like she had time. "Where do you go?" I should have made a joke. I should have shrugged. I should have said nowhere. Instead, I said, home. The word landed between us heavier than it deserved to be. Clara's expression didn't change much. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was recognition, subtle, quiet, dangerous. "Must be nice," she said. "Yeah," I said, and realised I had no idea if I was lying. When I walked back to the archive, the city looked the same as always. Wet, restless, pretending it wasn't lonely. But my chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. Chapter 2. The wrong kind of wanting. I thought I liked women. It was the conclusion everyone reached on my behalf. The world handed it to me like a default setting, and I accepted it the way you accept a poorly fitting uniform. Because what else are you supposed to do? I watched women all the time. On the street, I noticed the way they moved, how they stood in doorways, how they crossed roads, how they carried themselves like their bodies weren't an argument. Their hair caught streetlight and turned it into something softer. Their voices slid into conversation without having to climb over embarrassment. At work, my co-workers talked about women like they were shopping lists. Legs, hips, cute face, all of it said with the casual entitlement of men who'd never had to question whether they were allowed to exist. I laughed when I was supposed to, nodded when it was expected, kept my hands folded like I was holding something fragile. Inside, it felt different. When I looked at women, I didn't feel hunger the way men are supposed to feel. I felt attention, like I was watching a language I almost remembered, like I was trying to reverse engineer a secret. In the coffee shop, Clara wiped counters with slow movements, her sleeves pushed up. The gesture was ordinary, but the ordinariness of her femininity made my chest ache with something I couldn't name. I told myself it was attraction. But when I tried to imagine touching her, kissing her, taking her home, being a boyfriend the way men were boyfriends, the image felt distant, like a scene from a movie I'd seen, but never lived. At night, I stood in my bathroom, the mirror too honest under the cheap light. I tried to picture a future, a man's future. Me, older. Me, broader. Me, settled. A job that turned into a career. A girlfriend. A house. A life that would look fine in Christmas cards. The image never held. It flickered and died like a light bulb in the wrong socket. Then the mirror gave me my face back. A young man with tired eyes, as if he was always waiting for someone to tell him what to do next. Sometimes I pressed my palm flat to the glass, like it might warm me through the lie. Sometimes I whispered, "What are you?" The mirror never answered. Chapter 3. The name in the drawer Eva arrived on an evening that wasn't special in any way. No storm, no music, no revelation. Just an ordinary night with the city breathing outside my window and the radiator clicking like it was keeping time. I was sitting on my bed, half-dressed, staring at the wall like it had insulted me, when the name came to me like a memory. Eva. Not invented, not chosen from a list. Remembered. I said it out loud once, quietly, like I might scare it away. Eva. Nothing in the room objected. I tried saying Thomas afterward, just to test it. It felt like biting tinfoil. The next day at work, I wrote the name on a scrap of paper and folded it in half. My handwriting was careful, almost reverent. I slipped it into the top drawer of my desk under old receipts and a broken stapler. It was ridiculous, hiding a name like it was contraband. But it didn't feel ridiculous. It felt necessary. Every night after that, I opened the drawer like I was checking whether the city had changed its mind. I took the paper out and unfolded it slowly, like it might tear if I rushed. Eva. Some people say home is where the heart is like it's something you stitch onto a pillow. I didn't know what home was yet, but I knew my heart leaned toward that name, the way a compass leans north. Chapter 4. The store upstairs. There's a particular kind of courage in walking into a place where you don't belong and refusing to apologize for breathing. It was a Saturday, bright enough to make the truth feel more dangerous. I told myself I was running errands. I told myself I needed socks. I told myself anything except the real reason. I was starving for confirmation. The department store smelled like perfume and polished floors. The escalator hummed under my feet as I rode it upward, and I felt every second of the climb like a heartbeat. Upstairs was the women's section. It wasn't guarded. It wasn't forbidden. It was just socially policed. The kind of space where the world decides whether you're allowed to exist based on how confident you look doing it. I stepped in. My hands were sweaty. My mouth was dry. My eyes fixed on racks like looking too directly at anything might expose me. I pretended I was shopping for someone else. That lie lasted about 8 seconds. I touched a sweater. Soft knit, light grey. The fabric didn't fight my fingers. It felt like the opposite of everything I wore. I let my fingertips stay there too long. A sales associate glanced over mid-30s, bright nails, a lanyard. She smiled politely and went back to folding shirts. No alarm, no confrontation, no humiliation. Just nothing. That nothing was a miracle. I picked up a few things with hands that shook only slightly. Leggings, a simple top, underwear that made my stomach flip. At the last second, I grabbed a cheap hair tie, even though my hair was nowhere near long enough to need it. At the register, the cashier scanned everything with bored efficiency. "Receipt in the bag?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and my voice sounded strangely steady. I walked out with the plastic bag swinging at my side, and I felt like I was carrying both contraband and salvation. The city outside looked the same, rain-slicked streets, people moving fast, nobody looking at me long enough to see the earthquake inside my chest. I didn't feel brave. I felt real. Chapter 5. The first time wearing them, I waited until night. Not because night was safer, exactly because fear is rarely logical, but because darkness makes you feel like you have permission to be private. In my apartment, the air was still. The radiator clicked. The streetlight outside painted a pale square on the floor, like a spotlight that didn't know it was one. I locked the door, then checked it again. The clothes lay on my bed like a dare. I started with the underwear, hands trembling as if I were doing something illegal. Then the leggings, the fabric sliding over my legs like water. Then the sweater, soft and forgiving, falling over my shoulders in a way that didn't demand anything from me. When I stood in front of the mirror, my brain immediately began listing everything wrong. Jaw, shoulders, the tiredness in my eyes, the way my posture still tried to disappear. But underneath those criticisms was something else quiet and undeniable. Relief, not fireworks, not instant perfection. Relief like a muscle unclenching after years. I stepped closer to the mirror. The fabric softened the outline of me. The silhouette wasn't right yet, but it was closer. closer in the way a song feels closer when you finally find the right key. I raised a hand to my cheek, and I whispered, Ava, saying it felt like opening a window. Tears came before I could stop them. Silent, careful tears. The kind you cry when you realize you've been holding your breath for years and only just noticed. I sat on the edge of the bed and let them happen. When the crying stopped, I looked at myself again. I didn't look beautiful. I didn't look finished. But I looked like someone telling the truth for the first time. And that was enough to keep me alive. Chapter 6. I told Clara on a rainy evening when the coffee shop windows looked like they were melting. It was closing time. The chairs were turned upside down on tables. The espresso machine hissed like it was tired of speaking. Clara wiped the counter in slow circles, her sleeves pushed up. The movement was ordinary, and that ordinariness made my throat tighten. I had been practicing the sentence all day like it was a dangerous spell. I need to tell you something, I said. Clara looked up, and her eyes didn't rush me. That alone felt like mercy. Okay, she said. I held the edge of the counter with both hands because I needed something solid. I think I'm a woman, I said. The words landed softly and didn't break anything. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't widen her eyes. She didn't do the pity face people do when they want credit for being kind. She just listened. After a beat, she asked, "What's her name?" My throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was the strange ache of being offered something you didn't think you deserved. Eva, I said. Clara repeated it once, quietly, like she was tasting the sound. Then she smiled small, warm, real. That fits you, she said. Something in my chest loosened. I laughed once, shaky. It does? Yeah, she said. It does. Outside, the rain pressed its palms against the glass. Inside, the lights were dim and kind. I wanted to tell her everything. The drawer, the sweater, the mirror, the crying, the fear. Instead, I just stood there, letting the moment hold me. Clara reached across the counter and covered my hands with hers, brief and steady. You're okay, she said. I didn't say thank you. The words were too small. I just nodded, because nodding was all I could manage, without falling apart. When I walked home, the city looked the same wet streets, smeared neon, people moving fast. But I felt, for the first time, like I wasn't walking alone. Chapter 7. Not yet the first therapist's office felt like a place where people came to be filed, not heard. The waiting room was painted in a colour that wanted to be reassuring and failed, somewhere between beige and surrender. A plant in the corner leaned away from the window, like it had learned not to expect much. Old magazines lay in a neat fan on the table, their covers smiling with a confidence nobody inside the room seemed to have. When he called my name Thomasy, he didn't look up from the folder. His office was worse. Too clean, too straight. The kind of tidy that doesn't come from care, but from control. His desk was bare except for a lamp, a notepad, and a pen that lay perfectly parallel to the edge, like it had been disciplined into obedience. He was in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, with a face that had never needed to negotiate with doubt. So, he said, sitting down, what brings you here? I had practiced this sentence in my head all morning like it was a dangerous trick. I think I'm transgender, I said. He made a small sound, not quite a hum, not quite a sigh, the sound of a man who has just been handed a file he already expects to dislike. How long have you felt this way? Longer than I've had words for it. He wrote something down. At your age, he said, identity can feel unstable. This doesn't feel unstable. He looked up then, really looked at me, like he was checking whether I matched a pattern he knew. It could be anxiety, he said. It could be depression. It could be discomfort with masculinity. Or a response to social influence. The words were careful. They were designed to make anything sound temporary. It's not about masculinity, I said. It's about me. He nodded in a way that meant he was being polite, not convinced. And how can you be sure? The honest answer was, I couldn't be sure the way other people seemed to be sure. My certainty had never been something that showed itself to strangers. But I was sure in the way you're sure your own skin is yours. I'm not sure, I said. But I'm sure I can't keep pretending. He leaned back and folded his hands. I don't think we should make irreversible decisions right now, he said. Let's explore other factors. Come back in 6 months. Not no. Not yes. Just not yet. The words were clean, reasonable, and they landed in my stomach like a block of ice. Outside, the city was wet and busy and uninterested in my personal crisis. Cars hissed through puddles. People walked past me holding their lives together like umbrellas. I stood on the sidewalk and felt the old fear rise up inside me like a dog that knows when you're tired. See? It said. You're an idea, not a person. At home, I opened my desk drawer and took out the folded paper. Eva. I held it in both hands. Okay, I said softly. Not yet. Then I looked at my reflection in the dark window and added, but still. Chapter 8. The second door, the second clinic, was in a building that didn't look like it had ever tried to win an argument. It sat between a dentist's office and a bakery that always smelled faintly of sugar and burnt patience. The entrance hall had scuffed tiles and a notice board full of flyers about yoga classes, grief groups, and something called Mindful Tuesdays that sounded like it was trying too hard. Inside, the waiting room had plants. Not plastic ones, real ones. A fern by the window. A tall, stubborn thing in the corner that leaned toward the light like it had made a decision. The chairs were mismatched. The walls had colour that didn't apologise for existing. I sat there with my hands folded in my lap and tried not to rehearse anything. That was new. When the door opened, the doctor said, "Thomas?" But her voice made it sound like a question, not a verdict. She was in her 40s, maybe, with hair pulled back in a way that suggested practicality more than authority. Her office had a window that looked out onto a side street where nothing important ever happened, which somehow made it feel safer. "Come in," she said. We sat. She didn't open a folder right away. "So," she said, "tell me what brought you here." I told her about the other doctor, about the not yet, about how those 2 words had felt heavier than a no. She listened without interrupting, her hands folded around a mug that had gone cold a long time ago. "And what do you think?" she asked when I finished. I stared at the edge of her desk. "I think I've been living in a house that isn't mine," I said. "And I'm tired of pretending I'm just a guest." She nodded slowly. "When do you feel most like yourself?" "In the evenings," I said. "When I'm alone. When I don't have to answer to my name." "And what name do you answer to?" The question sat between us like a small, careful animal. "Eva," I said. She didn't react the way people sometimes do. No pause, no adjustment. She just said it back. "Eva." The room seemed to accept it. We talked for a long time. About my childhood. About the way mirrors felt. About how I'd learned to disappear into clothes that didn't belong to me. She didn't hunt for trauma. She didn't try to reduce me to a cause. She asked what I hoped for. "I want the mirror to stop feeling like an argument," I said. "I want my body to stop feeling like a place I'm renting." She smiled. Not like she was proud of me, but like she believed me. "You know who you are," she said. "It's okay to trust that." When she finally turned to her computer and printed the prescription, it sounded like rain starting. She handed me the paper. "This isn't a finish line," she said. "It's a direction." Outside, the city looked exactly the same, but I didn't. Chapter 9. The pill in my palm carried the prescription home like it was made of glass. I kept touching it through the fabric of my coat pocket, just to make sure it was still there, like it might vanish if I stopped paying attention. In my kitchen, I set the pharmacy bag on the counter and didn't open it right away. The room was quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere a neighbour was playing music too loudly, the bass line like a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. I poured a glass of water. My hands were shaking, and that made me angry. Not at fear, at the years it had taken me to get here. I tipped the bag and let the pill fall into my palm. It was small, ordinary, the kind of thing you'd never look at twice. And yet my whole life leaned toward it. I sat at the table and stared at it, like it might start talking. Doubt arrived the way it always did. In tidy rows. What if you're wrong? What if this ruins things? What if people leave? What if you end up more alone than you are now? Then something older answered. Something that had been quiet for a very long time. What if you already are? I thought about the sweater in my closet, the paper in my drawer, the way my name felt when someone else said it right. I swallowed. The pill went down. The water was cold. The moment was unremarkable. And yet something inside me shifted, not like a door slamming open, but like a lock finally turning. I leaned my forehead against the cabinet door and laughed once, softly, because my body had finally agreed to start walking in the same direction as my heart. Chapter 10. Early weather, nothing dramatic happened. That was the first lesson. No overnight miracle. No sudden soft face in the mirror. No choir of angels. Change came the way seasons come, by being stubborn. My skin changed first. Not in a way anyone else would notice. In a way I noticed. Water felt different on my arms. Fabric stopped scraping me. Then my emotions widened. They didn't get louder. They got deeper. Sadness stopped hitting like a punch and started arriving like tidewater. Happiness spread instead of spiked. One afternoon, I was sorting old donations at the archive and found a box of vinyl records. Someone had written jazz on it in faded marker. I took one home. That night, I put it on and sat on the floor with my back against the couch. The singer's voice was tired and beautiful and honest in a way that didn't try to impress anyone. Halfway through the second song, I realized I was crying. Not because I was sad, because something in me recognized itself. I sat there and let it happen. Afterward, I didn't feel weak. I felt rinsed. Doubt still visited, but it didn't bring furniture anymore. Chapter 11. Raymond and the coffee that went wrong. The bookshop across from the archive had a window that always looked dusty, no matter how often it was cleaned. It was the kind of place you went into by accident and left carrying a book you didn't know you needed. I went in because I didn't want to go home yet. He was behind the counter, sorting paperbacks into stacks that looked like they'd been argued into place. He looked up. He had kind eyes. Not flashy, not sharp, the kind that made you think he listened more than he spoke. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I said back, and heard my own voice, still a little too careful, but getting better. I wandered the shelves. He didn't hover. That felt like a gift. I picked up a thin book of poetry and brought it to the counter. "Good choice," he said. "Is it?" I asked. "It doesn't lie," he said. He rang it up, slid it into a paper bag. "If you like coffee," he said, "there's a place 2 streets over that makes it strong enough to change your personality." I laughed before I could stop myself. "That sounds dangerous." "Only in the good way." I hesitated. Then I said yes. The cafe was warm and smelled like cinnamon and people pretending to work. We sat by the window. He told me his name was Raymond. We talked about the archive, about the shop, about the city's habit of pretending it was tougher than it really was. He asked my name. I didn't look away. "Eva," I said. He took it without question. "That suits you," he said, like he'd just noticed something obvious. Something in me loosened. It felt normal. And then the door opened. Eva, Lana's voice, arrived before she did. She wore a denim jacket, heels that sounded like impatience, and a wig that sat just a little too forward. Her makeup was bold and uneven. Her confidence was louder than the room. She crossed the cafe like a storm. "Oh my God, look at you," she said, grabbing my shoulders. "You look amazing. Is this a date?" Raymond blinked. "Hi," Lana said to him. "I'm Lana. We're friends from our trans support group." And just like that, my anonymity broke in half. My stomach dropped. She sat down without asking. "So, how long have you been on estrogen now?" she asked loudly. "Your skin is looking so much better. Are you still doing blockers?" "I'm still fighting my endo about that." I felt heat crawl up my neck. I loved Lana. She had been kind to me when I was new and terrified. But I had just reached the stage where the world mostly didn't question me, where I could walk into a cafe and just be a woman having coffee. And now, my entire medical history was a public announcement. Raymond's posture shifted. Not disgust. Alarm. He was no longer on a date. He was in a situation. Lana kept going. "Once you get past the awkward months, it really starts to click, right? People stop doing the pause." God, I hate the pause. I tried to interrupt. "Lana," she waved a hand. "And contouring helps with the jaw, obviously. The jaw is the enemy." Raymond set his cup down carefully. "I should go," he said. He looked at me with something apologetic and confused in his eyes. "It was nice meeting you," he said. Then he left. Just like that. The bell over the door rang like a small, cruel joke. I sat there with my cooling coffee and my suddenly very public life. Lana finally realized something was wrong. "Oh," she said. "Did I?" "It's okay," I said, because I didn't have the energy to explain everything that wasn't okay. When I left the cafe later, the city looked the same, but I felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with my clothes. And still, walking home, I told myself something I needed to hear. I am not doing this for Raymond. I am not doing this for Lana. I am not doing this for anyone else. I am doing this because when I say Eva, something inside me stops hurting. And that has to be enough. Chapter 12. Hair. The slow religion hair does not care about your urgency. That was the first thing it taught me. It grows the way time grows, whether you're watching or not, and never in a way that feels fast enough. At first, it was nothing, just an awkward in-between length that made me look like I'd lost a bet. Too long to be neat, too short to be beautiful. I started treating it like something fragile. I bought better shampoo. conditioner that smelled faintly of flowers, and something expensive I couldn't name. A brush that I kept clean like it was a small, sacred tool. In the evenings, I'd stand in front of the mirror and brush it slowly, the way you brush a horse or a child, not because it needs it, but because the ritual matters. Some nights I'd tilt my head and try to imagine it longer. Some nights I'd get angry at it for not cooperating. But mostly, it became a kind of quiet promise, proof that time was, at least in one small way, on my side. At the archive, my co-workers didn't comment on it. Or maybe they did, but only to each other. People are very good at noticing change without acknowledging it. Clara noticed. "You're growing it out," she said one afternoon, handing me my coffee. "Trying to," I said. She smiled. "It suits you." That word again. Suits. Like clothes. Like names. Like lives. At home, I started leaving my hair down more, letting it frame my face instead of hiding it. It still wasn't long, not really, but it was no longer pretending to be short. Sometimes, late at night, I'd sit on my bed and brush it and think, this is happening. Even if it's slow, it's happening. And slow, I was learning, didn't mean never. Chapter 13. The hair tie that refused I tried a ponytail too early. That's the honest version. I was standing in the bathroom one morning, already late, already irritated at my reflection for reasons it didn't deserve. My hair was doing that annoying thing where it looked almost manageable from the front and completely hopeless from the sides. I saw the hair tie on the sink, the same cheap one I'd bought months ago, the same one I'd tucked into my drawer like a promise. Maybe, I thought. I gathered my hair in both hands the way I'd seen women do 1,000 times. Casual, effortless, like it was nothing. It was not nothing. It slipped through my fingers. The front pieces escaped immediately. The back wasn't long enough. The whole thing collapsed like a bad excuse. I tried again. Same result. I stared at myself in the mirror and felt something sharp and old flare in my chest. Not dysphoria exactly. Something closer to grief, mixed with impatience. Why is everything like this? Why does everything take so long? For a second, I wanted to throw the hair tie across the room, let it snap against the wall like punctuation. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and breathed. Then I picked it up and put it back in the drawer next to the paper with my name on it. Not as a failure, as a bookmark. Later that day, walking to work, I caught my reflection in a shop window. My hair moved when I turned my head. Not much, but enough to notice. Not yet, I thought, and for once it didn't feel like a sentence. It felt like a schedule. Chapter 14. Missed the first time it happened. I thought I'd misheard. I was in a small grocery store near my apartment, standing in front of a shelf of pasta sauces and trying to decide whether any of them were worth trusting. "Excuse me, miss." The voice came from behind me. I didn't turn, not because I was rude, because I was certain they were talking to someone else. "Miss?" There was a pause, then a polite kind of uncertainty. "Sorry, could you pass me that one?" I turned. The woman was looking directly at me. "Oh," I said, stupidly. Then I took the jar and handed it to her. "Thank you," she said, and walked away. She didn't look back. She didn't hesitate. She didn't do the pause. I stood there for a second, holding a jar of my own like it was a prop I'd forgotten how to use. Miss. The word echoed in my head all the way to the checkout. At home, I replayed it in my mind like a suspicious miracle. Did she really mean me? Did she just assume? Was it the hair? The clothes? The way I stood? The next time was at the post office. "Next, please, miss." This time, I did turn immediately. The clerk didn't blink. The third time was at the archive, from a delivery guy who was clearly running behind schedule and didn't have time to philosophize about gender. "Got a package for you, miss." By the fourth time, something strange happened. I didn't feel the jolt anymore. I just responded, like it was normal, like it was obvious. That realization came later that night, when I was brushing my hair in front of the mirror and suddenly stopped. I didn't even question it. The thought sat there, quiet and enormous. For a long time, being seen had felt like a test I was always about to fail. Now, the world was handing me a word and not asking for proof. I smiled at my reflection, a little cautiously. "Miss," I said out loud, just to see how it sounded. It didn't feel like a costume. It felt like a door someone had stopped guarding. Chapter 15. Clara. Rewritten Clara and I had never named what we were. Back when I was still Thomas, there had been a quiet maybe hanging in the air between us. Not the kind that demands attention, the kind that sits politely at the edge of a table and waits to see if it's invited. We had gone for coffee sometimes after her shifts. We had walked together in the evenings. We had shared silences that felt almost like dates, if you squinted at them in the right light. Nothing had ever happened. And now, something had changed, not abruptly, not dramatically, but in a way you only notice when you realize you're standing in a different room than you used to be. One afternoon, I was sitting at our table in the cafe, brushing rain out of my hair with my fingers, when Clara brought over my coffee without asking. "You're early," she said. "I needed air," I replied. She looked at me for a second longer than usual, not inspecting, just seeing. "You look different lately," she said. "Good different, or you should sue someone different." She smiled. "Good different. Calmer." I laughed softly. "That might be the hormones, or the existential relief." She leaned her elbows on the table. "You know," she said, "I think when I first met you, I thought you were closed, like you were always behind glass. And now you're here. It wasn't a flirtation. It wasn't a loss either. It was something steadier." "I should probably tell you something," she said, stirring nothing in her cup. "A while back, I thought I thought you might ask me out." I felt a small, strange pang, not regret, more like the echo of a door that had closed quietly. "And now?" I asked. "And now," she said, looking at me with an expression that felt like choosing, "I think you're my best friend." The words settled into me like a warm coat. "Good," I said, "because I really need one of those." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "No matter what shape you're in," she said, "you're stuck with me." It didn't feel like consolation. It felt like family. Chapter 16. The care home. I started volunteering at the care home on a Tuesday that smelled like boiled vegetables and disinfectant. It wasn't heroic. It was a flyer on a notice board and a moment of thinking, why not? The residents were a gallery of stubborn miracles. Mrs. Kowalski, who refused help with anything and called everyone dear like it was a weapon. Mr. Hendricks, who pretended not to hear you and then answered questions you'd asked 10 minutes ago. And Agnes, who beat everyone at cards and never apologized. The staff were tired, kind, and endlessly practical. They showed me where the tea was, where the spare blankets were, and how to avoid Mr. Verbeek when he was in one of his moods. Nobody made a big deal out of me. That was the miracle. "Eva, could you help me with these? Eva, you're good with her, she likes you. Eva, stay a minute, tell me about that book." One afternoon, Agnes looked at me over her glasses and said, "You walk better now than you used to." I blinked. "You noticed?" "Of course," she said. "You used to walk like you were apologizing." She shuffled the cards. "Don't do that. It's a waste of time." I laughed, and she smiled like she'd fixed something. At the care home, I wasn't a project, I wasn't a debate, I wasn't even particularly interesting. I was just Eva, the one who made decent tea, the one who listened, the one who read out loud when someone's eyes were tired. I made friends there, with colleagues, with residents, with people who had lived whole lives and weren't impressed by drama. We talked about music, about movies, about weather, about whose turn it was to buy cake. And sometimes, walking home after a shift, I'd realize something quietly astonishing. I had a life, not a transition, not a journey, a life. And in that life, being trans was just one chapter, not the whole book. Chapter 17, Lana, and the distance between islands. Lana had been one of the first people to call me she without hesitation. That kind of gift doesn't get forgotten. We had met at a support group that smelled like cheap coffee and nervous courage. She had been loud, bold, unashamed, in a way that felt impossible to me back then. She talked about her transition like it was a war story, and a stand-up routine rolled into one. In the beginning, we texted a lot, about doctors, about paperwork, about bad days and small victories. There was comfort in not having to explain. But as months passed, something subtle shifted. Lana's life still revolved around transition. Every conversation came back to hormones, surgeries, being misgendered, being stared at, being corrected, being tired. My life didn't. Not because those things weren't still there, but because they weren't the whole story anymore. One evening, we sat in a bar together. Lana talked loudly about a fight she'd had with a pharmacist. And then he said, "Sir," again, she said, slamming her glass down. "I swear, one day I'm going to..." I listened, I really did, but part of me was thinking about a book I'd just read, about a woman at the care home who'd beaten me at cards and laughed like she'd won the lottery, about Clara's terrible taste in movies. When Lana paused for breath, she said, "So, how's your transition going?" I hesitated. It's Going, I said. But mostly I've been busy with other stuff. She frowned. Like what? Work, volunteering, friends, life. She looked at me like I'd said something slightly treasonous. You can't forget where you come from, she said. I'm not, I replied gently. I'm just going somewhere. We didn't fight, we just drifted. Not every bridge collapses. Some just stop being the road you need. Chapter 18, minus. The salon, and the first time hair stayed on my shoulders the day I booked the appointment. I stared at my phone like it had personally offended me. Not because calling a salon is hard. People call salons every day. People book appointments the way they buy groceries. People do it without rehearsing. But I had learned that rooms like salons came with their own language, one I'd listened to my whole life through glass. A room full of mirrors, bright lights, confident women. A room where your reflection isn't a private argument, it's a public statement. The receptionist answered on the second ring. Hi, this is Lumen Hair. How can I help? My mouth went dry the way it always did when I tried to turn desire into reality. Hi, I said. I'd like to make an appointment for a cut. Sure. What's your name? I hesitated. The old habit twitched like a bad scar. Eva, I said. Okay, Eva. When would you like to come in? And just like that, it was done. No tribunal, no pause, no editorial commentary. The world didn't always cooperate, but sometimes it did. And you had to take those moments the way you take warmth when you find it without asking why. On the day of the appointment, I wore my safest outfit. Jeans, a soft women's top, a coat that made me feel like I had shoulders in the right place. Practical Eva. Cautious Eva. The one who still kept a little distance between herself and other people's eyes. Inside, the salon smelled like shampoo, hairspray, and expensive certainty. The music was pop, and the lighting was honest. Mirrors everywhere, big enough to show the truth and small enough to offer no mercy. A stylist with bright nails and an easy smile came toward me. Eva? Yes! Hi, I'm Marit, she said, and then like it was nothing, she touched my shoulder lightly and guided me toward the chair. So, what are we doing today? I sat. The cape went around my neck. I watched my own face in the mirror. Marit ran her fingers through my hair. Not hurried, not tentative, professional, confident, matter of fact. You've got a nice texture, she said. You're at that awkward length where it wants to be two different things at once. That sounds familiar, I said. She laughed. We can give it a direction. Direction. That word again. I kept hearing it lately like the universe was trying to teach me a concept I'd never been allowed to believe in. I don't want it to look forced, I said carefully. I want it to look like it's supposed to be mine. Marit met my eyes in the mirror. There was no surprise there. No raised eyebrow. No covert scan of my jawline. Okay, she said simply. Then we'll shape it to you. That sentence hit me harder than it should have. People always talk about being seen, but they rarely mean it literally. Marit was looking at my face like she was reading a client, not solving a puzzle. She talked about layers and movement and face-framing pieces. She didn't say feminize, but her hands spoke the word anyway, softening angles by refusing to emphasize them. When she washed my hair, I closed my eyes. Warm water, skilled hands, the steady pressure of someone caring for you without asking you to justify your right to be cared for. For a moment, I felt something dangerously close to grief. For every year, I'd been too scared to sit in a chair like this and simply be a woman getting her hair done. Then, the scissors started. Snip, snip, snip. Hair fell in small, soft pieces to the floor. Not dramatic enough to qualify as a sacrifice, just enough to feel like a decision. When she was done, she turned the chair slightly. Okay, she said. Look. I looked. It wasn't a movie transformation. My bones didn't change. My life didn't suddenly become easy. But my hair now had shape. It framed me. It belonged to me. It looked like it had been intended, not negotiated. As I stood up, I felt it. The first time I'd really felt it. My hair settled on my shoulders. It rested there. Not briefly, not accidentally. It stayed. A soft tickle at the sides of my neck. A little warmth trapped under the strands. Slightly annoying. Completely perfect. On the walk home, the sensation followed me with every step. Hair brushing the top of my coat collar. Hair shifting when I turned my head. I kept wanting to tuck it behind my ears just to feel it move. It was such a small thing, and it made my chest ache, like I'd been handed proof of something I'd promised myself years ago in a desk drawer. At home, I stood in front of the mirror and turned my head left and right. Hair moved. I smiled at my own reflection slowly, cautiously, like the smile belonged to someone who had once been afraid to claim anything. Hi, I said softly. And for once, the mirror didn't argue. Chapter 19. Business cards, bright lights, and the strange geography of hair there are two kinds of mornings. The kind where you wake up and feel like yourself, and the kind where you wake up and have to build yourself from scratch. Makeup became my way of building. Not because I needed to be pretty. That word was too loaded, too full of someone else's rules. But I had learned something sharp and practical. A face is a business card. It sells who you are before you ever open your mouth. The world reads it fast like a cashier scanning a barcode and decides what it's allowed to do to you. I wasn't interested in begging the world anymore. I wanted to show up as Eva without footnotes. So I practiced. At first it was messy. Over-blended eyeshadow, too much concealer, brows that looked surprised at their own existence. I'd wash my face and start over until my skin felt tired and my patience felt thinner than my eyeliner. But you can't practice without improving. Not if you keep coming back. Improvement doesn't care about your insecurity. One evening, I caught myself doing it differently. Less panic, less camouflage, more intention. Instead of thinking, how do I hide Thomas? I thought, what do I like about Eva? It was a quieter question, a kinder one. I learned that softness is often just good lighting and decent blending. I learned that you can make your eyes look warmer by choosing shades that don't fight your skin. I learned that lipstick is not a mask, it's punctuation. I started wearing lower necklines at home first. Not plunging, not theatrical, just lower than I used to allow myself. Because cleavage had arrived in my life the way a truth arrives, gradually, then suddenly, then permanently. At first it startled me, then it made me proud, then it became mine. The first time I wore a dress outside, I did it like someone carrying something fragile, a simple black dress that fell to my knees. Nothing dramatic, but it moved differently than jeans. It asked me to walk like a woman instead of hiding inside denim. At the care home, Agnes looked at me over her glasses. Well, she said, someone's decided. I laughed. Decided what? Decided to stop hiding, she said, and went back to her cards like she'd just stated a fact about the weather. That same week, I started laser sessions on my face. People who haven't done it talk about it like it's vanity. People who have done it know it's closer to relief. In the clinic, I lay back with protective goggles on and felt the sharp snaps of light against my skin. Each one was quick. Each one was unpleasant. Each one was a small bargain. Temporary pain for long-term peace. I did my legs too, and underarms, and places no one sees unless they're very close. It struck more than once how strange my relationship with hair had become. I was obsessed with growing it in one place and erasing it everywhere else. Head hair, sacred. Body hair, enemy. I'd epilate until my eyes watered. I'd book laser sessions like they were medical appointments. I'd inspect my skin in bright bathroom light like a detective hunting evidence. Then I'd brush my head hair with reverence, counting millimeters like blessings. It was odd. It was intense. It was also honest. Because this wasn't about hair. It was about control. About choosing what belonged on my body and what didn't. One Saturday back at the salon, Marit suggested subtle highlights. Not too much, she said. Just enough to catch light. Enough to look intentional. Intentional again. I watched the foils go in. I watched myself in the mirror, looking like I was mid-transformation, which in a way I was. When it was done and my hair dried, the strands caught light differently around my face. Softer, warmer, like the sun had decided to participate. Walking home, I saw myself in a shop window and didn't look away. That was new. That was progress. Chapter 20, Girls' Night Out, and the pleasure of having opinions. Clara texted me on a Friday afternoon. Drinks tonight? No transition talk allowed, unless it's funny. I stared at the message and felt something loosen inside my chest. Regular plans. Regular rules. The kind of normal that used to feel like it lived behind glass. At home, I changed clothes twice before leaving. The first outfit was my old safe one. Jeans, a fitted top, boots. Practical, invisible, easy to disappear in. I looked at myself and felt bored. Not bored with my body, bored with my fear. I changed again. A skirt this time. Not tight enough to scream, not loose enough to hide. A soft top with a lower neckline than I would have dared a year ago. My cleavage was there, undeniable, like a quiet signature. My hair, now, at that shoulder resting length, fell into place with a little tickle against my neck. I paused with my hand on my hair tie, then left it down. Down felt like truth. At the bar, Clara was already there, waving. She had chosen a booth in a corner where the light was warm and forgiving, the kind of lighting that makes everyone look like they've slept well and made good choices. "You look," she started. "Don't," I warned, smiling. She grinned. "Fine. You look like you're going to rob the place and get away with it." "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me," I replied. We ordered drinks, we talked about work, about residents, about books, about a movie Clara insisted was brilliant despite the fact that it had the plot coherence of a spilled drink. For a while, I forgot about my body completely. That was the point. Then two men drifted over, drawn by the ancient magnetic field of two women laughing. One was tall, with a nice jaw, and the kind of smile that tried too hard. The other was shorter, charming in a careful way, like he'd practiced his friendliness in a mirror. "Hey," Talljaw said. "Mind if we join you?" Clara glanced at me with the kind of expression you share with a friend before you decide whether to be kind or cruel. I took my time. Really took my time. I looked Talljaw up and down the way men had looked at women my entire life, and I felt a new, guilty pleasure in how normal it felt. He had good shoulders, bad shoes. His friend had decent hair, nervous hands. I leaned toward Clara. "Tall one thinks he's the leading man," I murmured. "But his shoes say supporting character." Clara covered her mouth to hide her laugh. "Stop." "I'm not stopping," I whispered. "I'm evolving." The men waited, smiling, expecting to be invited. Clara said sweetly, "We're actually having a girls' night." Talljaw tried again. "Come on, just one drink." I felt a quiet, bright authority rise in me. "Sorry," I said. "We're busy. Busy being women. Busy being ourselves. Busy not performing gratitude for male attention." They hesitated, then drifted away, disappointed in a way that implied they believed disappointment was a tragedy. Clara and I watched them go. "I can't believe you just evaluated him," Clara said, delighted. "I know," I said. "I had opinions, like a real woman." "You are a real woman," Clara said, immediate and flat, like she was correcting a typo. I swallowed the warmth that rose in my throat. My hair shifted against my shoulders as I laughed again, and in the middle of the laughter I realized something. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for permission, not for validation, not for a man. I was living. Later, walking home, I pulled my hair into a messy bun just to see how it felt. My neck cooled instantly, and I missed the tickle, almost immediately. That made me smile. Missing your own hair, what a ridiculous, perfect kind of progress. Chapter 21. The word that disappeared it happened so gradually, I didn't notice until it was already gone. The moment of miss. It used to hit me like a bell, used to send a bright shock through my chest. Did they mean me? Did they really mean me? Then it became frequent, familiar. Then it became nothing. At the bakery, a woman behind me said, "Go ahead, miss," and I stepped forward without a flicker of thought. At the care home, a new staff member asked, "Miss, could you sign this?" And I signed, focused only on the form. At the archive, a courier handed me a package. "Here you go, miss." I took it and kept walking. The word had stopped being confirmation. It had become description. That was the shift. Not "I'm being seen correctly," but "of course I am." One evening, taking out my bun at home, my hair fell forward and settled just past my shoulders, brushing the top of my collarbone. Past my collarbone now, almost without my noticing. Not quite the armpit length yet, but longer than it had any right to be, considering how long I'd waited for it. The strands tickled my skin like they were reminding me they existed. I caught myself smiling at nothing. And then I understood. I wasn't living in transition anymore. I was living in life, and transition was simply a list of errands and rituals inside it. The kind of mundane detail that doesn't define you, the way brushing your teeth doesn't define you. That normalcy was precious. I didn't know yet how easily someone could try to steal it. Chapter 22. Mark and the dangerous comfort of being liked. I met Mark at the care home the way you meet most men in adult life, accidentally, while doing something that mattered more than flirting. He was helping his grandmother move in, carrying boxes like they were lighter than they were, cracking jokes too loudly, pretending he wasn't scared of the fact that his grandmother was beginning a new chapter at the end of her book. He had a friendly face and the kind of smile that people trust without thinking. Dark hair, good posture, a warmth that felt unearned, which is always the dangerous kind. "Do you work here?" he asked as I handed him extra blankets. "I volunteer," I said. "But yes, I'm here a lot." "Mark," he said, offering his hand. "Eva." No pause, no hesitation, no huh. Just, "Nice to meet you, Eva." I noticed that I didn't brace. I didn't listen for a correction in his voice. I didn't even wonder if he'd read me wrong. I just met him. Over the next week, he came back to visit his grandmother. Then again. Long enough that it stopped feeling like coincidence. He asked me questions, regular questions. What books I liked, what music I listened to, whether I always drank my coffee this strong, or if I was trying to punish myself. He made me laugh in a way that didn't feel like a performance. When he asked me out, it didn't feel like a test. It felt like a man asking a woman out. We went for drinks. The bar had warm light and sticky tables and fries that tasted like salt and consolation. Mark leaned close in a way that suggested he liked what he saw. He complimented my hair. "It's really nice," he said. "The colour, it looks great." "Highlights," I said. "They suit you." That word again. Suits. Like the world was slowly learning the correct fit. I felt a small, bright pride. Not desperate pride, not anxious pride, just the normal kind of pride you feel when you've made a choice and it's working. He touched my hand, and it felt natural. Walking home, I realised I wasn't thinking, does he see me as a woman? I was thinking, do I like him? That was the danger. Not because liking him was wrong, because it meant I was finally letting myself be ordinary, and ordinary makes you soft. Chapter 23. The knife and the lock were 3 dates in when I told him. Not because I was hiding, not because I was ashamed, because it had stopped being the headline. We were in the same bar, the same fries, the same warm light. Mark was telling a story about his coworker setting a microwave on fire with soup. I was laughing, genuinely, when the thought arrived with calm certainty. He should know, not because I owed him my story, because I respected myself enough to speak plainly. "There's something I should tell you," I said. Mark looked at me, curious. "Okay, I'm trans," I said. Simple, factual, like mentioning a scar. For half a second, he didn't react at all. Then something in his face shifted, as if a curtain had been pulled, revealing a man I hadn't met yet. It wasn't surprise. It was disappointment. "Oh," he said. The word fell like a dropped glass. He tried to recover with politeness, but politeness is a thin blanket. "I mean," he said, scratching the back of his neck. You're great. You really are. He hesitated, as if searching for a kinder way to say the same ugly thing. "That's not what I'm into." I watched him carefully. Not like someone pleading, like someone collecting evidence. "So," he said, "I think we should stop here." I nodded. "Okay." Relief flashed across his face, quick and selfish. Then he made the mistake people make when they want to justify themselves. He tried to make his preference sound like truth. "I just want," he said, "a real woman." There it was. The knife. It hurt, but not in the way he probably expected. It didn't send me spiraling back into Thomas. It didn't rewrite my face in the mirror. It didn't turn my life into a question mark again. It hurt like being insulted by someone you almost trusted. It hurt like discovering rot under paint. I stood up. Mark blinked, surprised at my calm. He had expected tears, or anger, or negotiation. People always expect you to bargain for your own humanity. I didn't. "Have a good life, Mark," I said. And I meant far away from mine. Outside, the air was cold enough to feel honest. I walked without rushing. For 3 blocks, my chest ached with the pure, physical pain of rejection, the kind that doesn't care about ideology, the kind that simply says, you were opened, and something hit you. I sat on a bench and let the hurt exist. Then, I did something new. I didn't let the hurt make decisions. I went home. In the bathroom, I pulled my hair down and watched it fall now clearly beyond my collarbone, brushing my upper chest. It felt heavier than before, not in a bad way, in the way that says time has been working quietly. I stared at myself, waiting for doubt. It didn't come. What came instead was something steadier. He doesn't get to name me. My reflection looked back with the tired patience of a woman who has learned the difference between pain and defeat. I washed my face, not because I needed to erase myself, because the day was done. As I turned off the light, I thought not dramatically, not as a vow, just as a fact. I didn't transition for him. I transitioned for me. And if someone can't see me, that's their problem, not my identity. Chapter 24. Raymond returns. Like a man who learned something the hard way, Raymond came back on a Tuesday that pretended to be ordinary. That's how most important things happen. Not with trumpets, with a bell over a door and a man standing there like he's trying not to flinch. I was at the archive, halfway through the kind of paperwork that makes you question why civilization bothered inventing ink. when the front desk called. "Eva, there's someone asking for you." My stomach did a small, stupid thing. Not fear, not excitement. A third emotion, something like caution dressed in curiosity. I walked out to the lobby and saw him. He looked the same, and not the same. Same coat, same steady eyes. But there was a different weight in his posture, like he'd been carrying something and finally decided to put it down. He didn't smile right away. He didn't pretend this was casual. "Hi," he said. "Hi," I replied. The silence between us was thick enough to lean on. "I didn't handle things well," he said. "Last time." I could have softened it for him. I could have said, "It's okay," the way women are trained to say it's okay when something isn't. Instead, I stayed honest. "No," I said. "You didn't." He nodded once, like he deserved that. "I panicked," he said. "And then I left you sitting there like you were a situation I didn't want to deal with." His voice tightened on the word situation, like it tasted bad. "You were having coffee," he continued, and I turned it into something else. I watched him carefully. He wasn't asking for absolution. He was placing responsibility where it belonged, which is rarer than people think. "I'm sorry," he said. Not in the polite way, in the real way. There was a moment when the old Eva, the hungry, early Eva might have rushed to soothe him, might have latched onto the apology like it was proof I could be loved. But I wasn't hungry anymore. I had eaten, slowly, carefully. I'd built a life that fed me in other ways. So I didn't rush. I didn't like being exposed like that, I said. It wasn't about her, Lana. It was about me not being ready to have my whole history announced to strangers. He nodded again. "I understand." "Do you?" I asked, not unkindly, just plainly, because the worst part wasn't that she said it. The worst part was watching you leave. His eyes flickered. "I know," he said. "I've thought about it more than I deserve to." That line had the right kind of self-awareness, the kind that doesn't dramatize itself, just acknowledges the mess. I folded my arms, partly for warmth, partly because it kept me from doing anything impulsive. "What changed?" I asked. He exhaled. "Me. Slowly. The way things actually change." He glanced toward the glass doors, the street beyond them bright and indifferent. "I told myself I was just surprised," he said. But it wasn't surprise. It was fear. Of what it meant about me. Of what people would think. Of what I'd have to admit. He looked back at me, steady now. And then I realized something ugly. If the only version of you I can handle is the version that makes my life easy, then I don't deserve to be anywhere near you. I let that sit. The archive lobby smelled like paper and winter coats, and the city's old secrets. In the end, I didn't give him forgiveness like a prize. I gave him a door. Not wide open, just unlocked. "I'm not going to pretend you didn't hurt me," I said, "but I'm willing to talk." His shoulders lowered slightly, like he'd been bracing. "I'd like that," he said. "Coffee," I added, because I could hear the quiet humour in my own voice, and it felt good to let it exist. But somewhere, Lana doesn't know. A small smile finally arrived on his mouth. "Fair." He hesitated. "Can I take you out, properly, if you're willing?" I studied him for a beat. In my head, I saw Mark's face rearranging itself, saw the knife of his words. I felt the bruise of it in my chest. Then I felt the steadier truth underneath. I'm not brittle. Raymond wasn't asking me to rescue him from his guilt. He was asking for a second chance like a man who understood a second chance is not owed. "Yes," I said. "One date." He nodded. "One date." I watched him leave, and something in me didn't rush after him. That was how I knew I'd changed. Chapter 25, Preparation, or the art of choosing yourself the day before the date. I stood in front of my closet and stared like it was a witness. Clothes had become a language I was still learning to speak fluently. Early on, I'd worn what felt safe: jeans, soft tops, things that suggested femininity, without demanding anyone commit to seeing it. But now, my body didn't leave much room for denial. Cleavage had arrived the way dawn arrives. Slow, inevitable. Then suddenly, you realize, the night is gone. I had spent months adjusting to that curve in the mirror, the soft insistence of it. At first it had made me tender, then proud. Now, it simply felt like my body had finally started living in the same house as my heart. I pulled out a dress, not the kind you wear to make a point, the kind you wear because it makes you feel like yourself. Simple, dark. A neckline low enough to acknowledge I had curves, not so low it felt like I was trying to convince anyone. I held it against myself and watched the shape. Then I thought of hair. My hair had become its own quiet religion. It was beyond my collarbone now, thick enough to feel like it had weight. When I wore it down, it warmed my neck. It tickled sometimes. which was both annoying and perfect. It had learned to fall into place like it belonged there. And when I wore it in a bun, I missed it the way you miss a familiar scarf on a cold day. I stared at myself and thought about the strange geography of it all. I was obsessed with hair, growing it where I wanted it, erasing it where I didn't. Laser on my face had been an act of mercy. Laser on my legs, my underarms, other parts of me, acts of reclamation. Each session was a small negotiation with biology. I'm allowed to decide what stays. It still struck me sometimes how much of becoming myself involved managing hair like it was a moral problem. That afternoon, I went back to Marit. The salon felt less intimidating now, which was its own kind of milestone. Date? She asked the moment she saw me, eyes bright. Is it that obvious? She grinned. Honey, yes. I sat in the chair and watched myself in the mirror while she combed through my hair. What do you want? She asked. Soft? Sleek? Romantic? Me, I said. But finished. Marit nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. Then she surprised me. Can I do your brows? She asked. Just a little shaping. It'll open your face, make everything rounder, softer. My stomach tightened, the way it always did when someone proposed a change to my face. Faces carry history. Faces get read before you speak. Faces are the business card of the soul. But I looked at my reflection and realized I wasn't afraid of being seen anymore. I was afraid of being seen wrong, and Marit had never seen me wrong. Okay, I said. She worked carefully. Wax and tweezers, small, precise motions. Each pull was a tiny sting, each one followed by a smoother line. When she handed me the mirror, I blinked. The change was subtle, but it altered the whole geometry of my expression. Less angular, less defensive, more open, more Eva. I swallowed. That's me, I said, almost surprised. Marit smiled. I know. On the way home, I passed a shop window and caught my reflection. Hair falling cleanly, brows softer, face calmer. A woman who looked like she belonged to herself. I didn't feel nervous about the date anymore. I felt ready, not to prove anything, to enjoy something. Chapter 26. The date that worked Raymond picked a restaurant that didn't try too hard. Warm lamps, quiet tables, the kind of place where conversation doesn't have to fight the music for oxygen. It smelled like bread and wine and people taking their time. He stood when I walked in, not performatively, not like a movie, just with that simple, old-fashioned respect that makes you feel seen without being inspected. His eyes moved over me hair, dress, the shape of my neckline, and then settled on my face. You look, he began, then stopped, like he didn't want to cheapen it. Like I'm about to arrest you? I offered. He laughed, relieved. No, like, you're comfortable. I felt a small satisfaction at that. Comfortable had been the longest road of all. We sat. He ordered a bottle of wine after checking if I wanted it, which was a small thing, but small things are how you recognize safe men. They ask questions instead of assuming ownership. We talked. About books, of course. About the archive. About his shop. About the care home and Agnes's ruthless card skills. About music, how some songs feel like they were written by someone who knew your private life. He didn't tiptoe around me. He didn't force transition into the center of the table. But he didn't ignore it either. He let it be what it was, a chapter, not the whole book. At one point he said quietly, "Can I ask you something? And you can tell me to mind my own business." "Proceed at your own risk," I said. He smiled. "When you told me your name ever that first time, you hesitated." I felt my throat tighten slightly. Not fear, memory. I admitted. "Why?" he asked gently. I looked down at my hands, then back up. "Because giving someone your name is giving them a key," I said. "And I used to be terrified people would use it to lock me out instead." Raymond's expression softened. "I'm sorry I proved you right," he said. "You did," I said, honest. Then, after a pause, "But you came back." He nodded. I did. I watched him for a beat. There's a difference between men who come back because they miss you, and men who come back because they understood what they lost. Raymond had that second look in his eyes. After dinner we walked. The night was cold enough to make the air feel clean. My hair moved against my shoulders, warmed the back of my neck. I realized I liked how it felt in the night air, like a small, constant reminder that time had been working. Raymond walked beside me without crowding me. At my door he stopped. "I'm not going to ask to come in," he said. "Not because I don't want to, because I want to do this right." That, too, was a small thing. But small things are the whole story, if you pay attention. I smiled. "Good," He hesitated, then said, "Can I kiss you?" The question landed softly. No assumption, no entitlement. I felt the last ghost of Mark's knife twist in my memory. Then it loosened. Because Raymond wasn't trying to validate me. He wasn't trying to own me. He was simply asking to share something. "Yes," I said. The kiss was warm and unhurried. Not fireworks, not rescue, just a door opening gently. When we pulled apart, Raymond rested his forehead lightly against mine for a moment, like he was learning the shape of calm. "I'll see you soon," he said. "Yeah," I replied. "You will." After he left, I went inside and leaned against the door. I didn't feel like a girl who'd finally been chosen. I felt like a woman who'd finally chosen back. And that was the sweetest part. Chapter 27. Old jokes. New Lives. The bar was loud in the way bars get loud when nobody inside is particularly drunk, yet just hopeful. Clara had chosen it. She always chose places that made you feel like something might happen, even if all that happened was a good conversation and a second round. She arrived first with Tommy. Tommy was tall, broad-shouldered, and had the kind of face that suggested he'd spent a long time being underestimated and learnt to be patient about it. He shook my hand like he meant it, and Raymond's like he planned to keep meaning it. "Nice to finally meet you," he said to me. "Clara's talked about you. Only good things, I'm sure," I said. Clara snorted. "Define good." We took a booth near the back. The lighting was warm and forgiving, the kind of light that makes everyone look like they slept 8 hours and made decent choices. Drinks arrived, then food, then the pleasant, low-stakes chaos of 4 people learning each other's rhythms. At some point, Clara leaned back and studied Tommy with theatrical seriousness. "You know," she said, "when I first met you, you kind of reminded me of Eva." Raymond raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Tommy blinked. "Is that good or bad?" Clara grinned. "Both. Eva used to look like someone who'd been living in the wrong coat for years and didn't know how to take it off. You had that same lost but trying expression." I laughed. "That's the nicest insult I've ever heard." Tommy smiled sheepishly. "I did just move here. I don't know where anything is." "There you go," Clara said. "See? Same energy." Raymond glanced at me, amused. "I can't picture you lost. That's because you met me after I found the map," I said. The conversation drifted. To work, to bad movies, to Tommy's spectacularly terrible sense of direction. At one point, while Raymond was talking about a rare book he'd just found, I felt my hair slip forward across my shoulder. It was long now, well beyond my collarbone, thick enough to have weight. It brushed against my chest when I moved, warm and familiar. I lifted my hand and tucked it behind my ear. The gesture was automatic, unremarkable. And then I realized what made it different. I wasn't doing it because I was nervous. I wasn't doing it because I was afraid of my face or my past. I was doing it because it was in the way. I looked at Raymond as he spoke. He caught my eye and smiled, mid-sentence, like he'd just noticed something he liked. He knows, I thought, and he doesn't care. Not in the heroic way, not in the performative way, in the normal way. I felt a quiet warmth settle in my chest, the kind that doesn't demand attention. Clara watched us for a second, then looked away with a small, satisfied smile. Later, as we were leaving, she slipped her arm through mine. "You look happy," she said. "I am," I replied. And for once it didn't feel like a brave thing to say. It felt like a factual one. Chapter 28. Spring blossoms. My hair reached my armpits in early spring. I noticed it in the shower first. The way you notice something by accident. Wet strands clinging to skin that, for years, I'd worked carefully to keep smooth and bare. It startled me. Then it made me laugh. After all the laser sessions, all the epilating, all the obsessive attention to erasing hair from everywhere else. And here it was, arriving from above like it had taken the scenic route. I stood there for a long moment, water running, thinking about how strange the body is, how you fight it in one place and celebrate it in another, how becoming yourself is sometimes just learning which battles are worth winning. I wore my hair up more often now, if only because it was heavy and warm. But every time I did, I missed it. Missed the way it moved, the way it framed me, the way it reminded me constantly that time had been working in my favour. At the care home, life went on in its stubborn, gentle way. Agnes still beat everyone at cards. Mr. Hendricks still answered questions 10 minutes late. New residents arrived. Old ones left in the quiet way people do when their stories are finished. One afternoon, helping a woman unpack her things, I found a small framed photo of her and her husband on their wedding day. "Where should I put this?" I asked. She looked at it for a long moment. "By the bed," she said. so I know where I am when I wake up. That stayed with me. For a long time, I hadn't known where I was when I woke up. I'd lived like a visitor in my own body, like someone passing through. Now, when I woke up, I knew. At home, Raymond sat at my kitchen table sometimes, reading while I cooked, or cooking badly while I pretended not to notice. It wasn't dramatic. It was ordinary. And ordinary, I was learning, is the rarest luxury there is. Some nights we talked about the past, sometimes about his, sometimes about mine, sometimes about neither. We never turned my history into a monument. It was just part of the landscape, like a long road you took to get somewhere nice. Chapter 29, Where the Heart is Theirs, a particular kind of evening that feels like punctuation. Not an exclamation point, not a question mark, just a period. The end of a sentence that says, "This is complete." Raymond and I were walking back from the care home one night, my heels clicking on the pavement like my own personal theme song. Raymond had come along to help with a small concert one of the residents insisted on organising. It had been terrible and wonderful in equal measure. The air was cool, the street quiet, my hair was down, softly waved, the highlights catching a warmer note now, brushing my arms when I walked. At one point, I caught our reflection in a dark shop window. 2 people, walking, talking, belonging to themselves. I thought about Thomas, not with pain, with distance, like thinking about a house you grew up in but don't live in anymore. Important, but not home. For a long time, I'd thought home was something you arrived at all at once. A door, a revelation, a moment. I was wrong. Home is something you stay at. You stay in your body. You stay in your name. You stay in your life. Even when it's hard. Even when it's boring. Even when it's quiet. Especially then. At my door, Raymond paused. "You okay?" he asked. I smiled. "Yeah, I was just thinking. Dangerous hobby. I know." I unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment was warm and familiar. My coat on the chair. My books on the table. My life, in its small, unremarkable order. I realised something then, as simply and as finely as you realise gravity. I wasn't on my way anymore. I was here. I had taken the long way home. And now that I'd arrived, I didn't feel like leaving. Not ever again.